Welcome back to our viewers online. We're going to pick up with our program again. I am going to ask the wonderful Chief Ann Richardson to come to the podium for a special presentation. Chief Ann, please join us.
Good evening, everyone. Did you enjoy lunch? Yes. Good. Excellent. This morning when I was introducing the chiefs that were present, I missed my friends at Nottoway, Miss Lynette Alston, Chief of the Nottoway Indians of Virginia. And Chief Bullock of the Patawomack Tribe, Stafford County, Virginia. He must still be out in the hallway eating or talking. But I wanted to take this time right now to honor someone who, an organization that has been incredible for the tribes here. You know, I've done fundraising for 30 years and written grants and all of the stress that goes with it. And rarely do you ever find a foundation quite like this one. When we started the ICC, the notion of the ICC, we had a major funder come in that funded Melissa's position and got us all started, and that was the Pew Charitable Trust. And we're grateful to them for helping us do that. But once Miss Extraordinaire came to town, who has done fundraising for 20-some years among the major philanthropy groups in the country, she found this organization that has been instrumental for all of us, not only the ICC, but for the tribes who have participated. Their trust philanthropy has been amazing for all of the tribes. And at a time when the federal government is cutting everything that can be cut, and it's causing ripples throughout the nation from unemployment to nonprofits closing down to tribal governments and state governments, actually, hospitals and everything else. They stepped forward. They understood the landscape that we were in. You know, the landscape in Virginia is tough, and they recognized that. I would like to ask the Weisberg Foundation representative, Ms. Rashawn, where are you? Could you please come forward? They have been incredible in the equity and inclusion space. They don't care who's in the White House. And I just want to commend you for that, because there are many, many organizations that have shrunk back from that. And you're as bold as you can be. And I'm a bold person, and I like bold people. But Nina Weisberg and her staff funded the ICC for its operations and capacity building. And you know what else they did on top of that? They funded every tribe that was a member so that they could have capacity to participate with the ICC. Have you ever heard of a foundation doing that? So it is my distinct honor to present to you the Funder of the Year Award to the Weisberg Foundation, thanking you for being our 25 Outstanding Funder of the Year, and thank you for supporting the Virginia tribes. wow. I mean, it really is incredible to see the kind of support that we are getting from philanthropy, the support that we're getting from nonprofits. How about all of these conservation agencies in the state and federal government that are joining us on our quest to protect Mother Earth and our waters? The legal teams that are here are incredible. Thank you for the master class this morning, and we're looking forward to more this afternoon. Thank you all so much, and God bless you, and get ready, Melissa. You're next. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to also comment on the Louisburg Foundation and their leadership. And one of the things I want to pull out is not just the way and how they've supported us, but how they've supported the community and really thinking creatively about how to care for people and organizations that are at the front lines, be they tribal nations, be they nonprofit organizations, be they community organizations. But not only that, they're not just focused on the money they give out, called grants. They're also focused on how they're investing their endowments, right? And so for those of us in the business of fundraising, what you give out traditionally in a philanthropic institution is about 5% of your full capacity. And so they're really doing 100%, which is an amazing thing, thinking about how they invest their money, how they build power, how they build movements. And it's been refreshing. They've been such great partners, but also very quiet, right? And asking, what do the tribes need? So I know many of the tribes could tell you stories about how beneficial their quiet support and solidarity has been. And so just thank you so much. It's just remarkable at this time. And as someone who has been a fundraiser just as long as Chief Ann, not quite as long, there's enough money out there. We just need to make sure that it flows in the right spaces, and we need to build the cases together. So I just want to thank them for that. So I'm gonna invite a wonderful colleague to the stage, Mr. Kiki Carroll, who has really been supporting these tribal nations up here, in addition to this other flag, which we'll note all the way on the end, has supported a delegation from New Zealand. And he's going to share a little bit more. Kiki Carroll is the Executive Director of the United South and Eastern Tribes, which is an intertribal consortium, as well as its Sovereignty Protection Fund, which we got a master class last conference on tribal consultation and tribal diplomacy from Kiki. And so I'd like to welcome him to the stage, and he's going to also introduce our delegation. Thank you.
All right. Epiva Incentivois, Naheshave, Kitki Carroll, Natista. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kitki Carroll. I am a citizen of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe, and I am Executive Director for United South and Eastern Tribes and United Southeastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund. In recognition of this morning's introductory presentations, talking about rights of nature, in that space, we also talked about human rights. And I want to reinforce something that was said this morning, I believe, by both Thomas and Frank, but Frank had talked about it a little bit longer, reinforcing the concept of Indian law as opposed to federal Indian law. We have spent several decades mastering federal Indian law in order to navigate those waters as best we can. But in order to really talk about exerting one's inherent sovereign rights and authorities, you're leaning into Indian law, tribal law. Right, and that is newer for us because we're working with a whole framework of federal Indian law that's rooted in legal fiction, right? It's a legal framework that was constructed to support all the things that we talk about. So I want to applaud those gentlemen for raising that this morning. But I want to share a story with you. 1877, after a long, harsh, bitter cold in the plains, northern plains in Nebraska, a father is ultimately what he was, and his family were forcibly removed from their home. Not because they didn't pay their mortgage, not because they were being evicted in that sort of mortgage sort of way, but they were being removed because of a federal Indian policy of removal. This gentleman went by the name of Chief Standing Bear. He was the tribal leader of the Ponca tribe. And on the journey of moving his family and his people down to Oklahoma, his son died. But his son's wish was to be buried in his homelands of Nebraska. So Chief Standing Bear started the long journey back to his homelands to honor his son's last wish. But he got caught in Nebraska for trespassing. In 1879, this case went to court. It was Standing Bear versus Crook. The reason why I'm raising this court case and the decision that came from that court case in 1879, which was 15 years after the end of the Civil War and everything the Civil War was about, that was the first time in U.S. history that we as Native peoples were recognized as human beings. Prior to that, we weren't even considered humans. So it was an intentional effort of dehumanization to make way for greed. Those goals of manifest destiny, right? That's what that was all about. In that court case, the quote that is infamous from that hearing is Chief Standing Bear held his hand out to the court and he said, "My hand is not the color of yours, but if you pierce it, I shall feel pain. If you pierce your hand, you too will also feel pain. The blood that flows from mine will be of the same color as yours. I am a man. The same God made us both." The reason why I'm leaning into this dehumanization part of this story is that this isn't some sort of remnant of centuries ago. It's with us today. Dehumanization of a people or a group is a tool and a means for others to achieve those goals that they have. Melissa noted in her remarks that this isn't just a concern here in the United States. It's a global one. And it's bringing a sickness to our shared home that we all share together. And I firmly believe that this moment, that there is an opportunity for us as Indigenous peoples around the globe to stand together. Not only for our inherent sovereign survival as a people in our perseverance, but for the benefit of all humanity, not just for us as Indigenous peoples. We all occupy this same home. While I am not Lakota, my Cheyenne people are kin to Lakota people who have a say, Matakuye Oyasin. We are all related, right? The reason why I'm offering those introductory remarks is to reinforce why we've built this beautiful relationship with these beautiful friends who are sitting at that table with me over there, who started out as strangers, who then become friends, who now I consider family. Because even though they are 10,000 miles away, it is Friday, it is tomorrow there, they made the journey to be with you all today because they understand the importance of that. And they are here to supposedly learn from us. What I will tell you is we are doing as much learning from all of them as they are from us. So if I could just get them all to stand up for a moment, just one more time, to recognize our Aotearoa friends. Did I get it right? And while I wish every single one of them could be up here because they are each individually beautiful and brilliant in their own right, I want to introduce Helmut, who is somebody I admire tremendously. He is a deep, deep thinker, and he is doing a lot within their space to advance the ball in the same way that we are trying to do. So tying this back to my comments about Chief Standing Bearer, we are all in this together. Our experience is similar, and what we are trying to fight for is no different despite those miles that separate us. It's to make sure that our inherent sovereign existence and our rights of as indigenous peoples is respected and understood, and that we aren't dehumanized in a way that makes way for others who have intentions that aren't just. So this is not an overnight correction. This story that we talk about is one that is centuries old. But advancing the ball is a methodical, intentional effort that we have to do every day we wake up, right? That has to be our goal, because we're all in this for the long term. We want short-term gains, yes, but we're in this for the long term so that those ancestors that come after us, just like we now have the opportunity to be here to do this work today, have that much more solid foundation for us to really exert those authorities in a way in which our Creator intended. So that's enough from me. I want to introduce Helmut so he can share some of his thoughts with all of you. Thank you once again for allowing me here to be with you.
Okay, nui kai hurahi tēnā tātou. So the great ones here assembled, greetings to you all. Tuatahi rā, me mihi atu ki te runga rawa, nāna I hanga, nāna I homo e ngā mea katoa. Acknowledgement to the Creator of us all, who has given us all things and created all things. Ko te papa tuanuku e takoto mai rā, tātou I haramai, tātou I hoki atu. To our Mother Earth, from whom we've all sprung and to whom we will all return. Koutou rā ngā rangatira no tēnei no ngā iwi take o tēnei whenua. To you, the great chiefs of this land and the peoples of this land. Kōrera we ware tia rātou ngā tini tūpuna kua weha atu ki te pō. Never forgetting our ancestors who've gone before us and whom we remember here this day. Me mihi atu ki a koutou ki a tātou katoa I tēnei wā. Greetings to us all, to you all, and to us all here today. This is a greeting that comes to you in the language of my people from our little islands, as Kiki has said, a very long way away. We're very grateful to be here today with you. I've framed up, oh, you can't see it. The words have been taken off. Oh, well, that's a shame. I'll have to say them. I framed up my presentation with the famous words of a haka, a war dance made famous by our national rugby team, the All Blacks, who've travelled the earth, reciting those words as they've performed that war dance. The words are ka mate, tis death, ka ora, tis life, whiti te rā, the new day dawns. I called my presentation, I gave my presentation those words because aside them being belonging to my tribe, and coming from the greatest war chief of my tribe, and arguably one of the greatest of our land, those words are actually evocative of the inevitable roller coaster of life, where we continually face what appears to be ka mate, things that are looking to take us down. But that if we persist and endure and exert ourselves, ka ora, life still beckons. And if we do it with all of our might and do it together, whiti te rā, the new day in fact does dawn to bring us great blessings yet before us. And I think that metaphor is not only true of all of our lives individually, but collectively in the nations that we all have been blessed to lead. So I've been asked to speak to you, or at least that's what I thought I was asked to speak about, the journey of my people and our journey of sovereignty that we've been on and where we're at, and our thoughts in the go forward. I thought it sensible to take a few minutes to begin and just grounding the conversation in some historical facts that will enable you and I to have a shared understanding of the story I'm going to tell. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to put my watch up here and make sure that I don't overuse what's available to me. In 1840, February 6th, the British government sent representatives to Aotearoa, New Zealand to sign a treaty called the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi in our language. A simple document which I'll reference in a minute, but they did so because in 1835 previously a confederation of tribes, chiefs, had signed a declaration of independence, sent it to the British Crown, and it had been formally acknowledged by the King, George, if my memory serves me right, and included with it was a flag. And so when Queen Elizabeth in 1840 sent her representative to our land, it was with full intention and knowledge that in fact our tribes and our chiefs were in fact in possession of the sovereignty that they were seeking to tap into in order their laws to be available to be available in our land. The Treaty of Waitangi, as I said, is a simple document. Its first articles speak of our chiefs granting to the British governor, kawana, transliteration, governorship over the British settlers that were on our lands, and also granting to them rights of first refusal on our lands if we wanted to dispose of them, sell them to them. In return, reciprocation, the British promised, well, first they acknowledged that we were in fact sovereign over our people and place, and then lastly they offered to us equal rights and benefits of imperial citizenship, whatever that meant. The problem was though, we seem to have had a little bit of troubles, but that's all right, I'm not sure why. Just some of the pictures are gone, never mind. The problem arose reasonably quickly in that the Maori language version and the English language version didn't say the same thing. Funny that. In the English version, our people ceded sovereignty to the British. In the Maori version, we gave them governorship over their people. In the second article, the British acknowledged that we were sovereigns of our people in place. In the Maori version, they were acknowledging we had property rights. You can see where the problems immediately arose. Ka mate, tis death, was the story of the colonial period which you are all too painfully aware of. However, thankfully, in fact, just as a quick reflection, Kiki just mentioned 1877. If I caught what you said right, Kiki, that was where a federal removal policy was implemented.
That's when they were removed.
Right. In 1877, in my land, was when a judgment was reached by the Chief Justice of our land that the Treaty of Waitangi was a simple nullity, and it began a period of legal invisibility of that constitutional agreement. So ka mate appeared on both of our continents or our lands in the same year, apparently in 1877. Just to stick with that parallel, no, I'll leave that there. So, however, in 1975, does that date ring a bell for you fellas? So in our land in 1975, there was a law passed that established the Waitangi Tribunal, which acknowledged the existence of the Treaty of Waitangi and set up an independent tribunal to consider historical breaches of that treaty. Again, an interesting parallel, because 1975 was, I know, a big deal to you fellas here in this land. Well, between then and now, we had been on a journey of truth and reconciliation, truth-telling and reconciliation, until 2 years ago when I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but I'll say it, a Trump-light new government entered power in our land, and with similar sort of disregard for norms, really set about disestablishing and unravelling much of what had arisen out of that 50-year journey of truth-telling and reconciliation and lawmaking. As you'll see from my slide, as our tribal nations confronted this reversal, egregious reversal, we really, as we discussed amongst ourselves, we really only have three options, and still do. Accept that redomination and reassertion of colonial type behaviour, strengthen ourselves through re-establishing partnership agreements with each other, and then try to do that with the Crown. And then last, to reimagine and reassert our tribal sovereignty regardless. So what have we been doing? Well, the first thing that we did as we met together was to consider what was in play for us. And we recognised quite quickly that our core problem is our relative lack of power. And that our relative lack of power flows out of three root causes. Our relative poverty. If we were rich enough, we could just ignore them and do whatever the heck we thought we needed to do. They would pay attention. We aren't that rich. Secondly, we are a minority. Although we're a lot bigger in our land, we're nearly 20% of the population, which is non-trivial, right? However, we're still a minority in a democracy, and therefore subject to the tyranny of the majority, which is possible because there is no written constitution in our land, and our treaty has no entrenched constitutional basis, which is what we were reminded of 2 years ago with the new government. Thirdly, and most concerningly, there is still the fierce independence that has characterised our people forever prevails today. Does that ring a bell? That last one, the opportunity and the need and the potential of us unifying ourselves, though, is the only one that we actually have total control over. And if we can do that, unify ourselves, then in fact everything becomes possible. There are three core strategies, though, that I am championing and other tribal leaders to try and reverse the situation we're in. On the poverty front, we are increasingly look to leverage the power of our combined resources through a number of different arrangements, mechanisms and opportunities, and that's getting significant traction, and I'm very excited about that and its potential. Already just in 2025, there's been a lot of publicity about the strength of what's called the Maori economy in New Zealand that has outperformed over the last decade the wider economy, and it's got a lot of attention both domestically and international. On the minority front, the opportunity that is ours to try to catalyse constitutional change is one that we now are entering into with renewed vigour. And we've taken lessons and encouragement from understanding with greater clarity the journey that's been taken here. Lastly, on the disunity one, again, this is a quote from that same Lord Normanby in 1839. While he kindly and correctly acknowledged that our tribes were in possession of the sovereignty over the people in place, he also rather unkindly referred to us as petty tribes who possessed few political relations to each other and are incompetent to act or deliberate in concert. While unkind, there was more than a grain of truth in that observation. The question still remains for us, and I think for you too, to some degree, is what does it mean to be tribal sovereigns in the 21st century? The good news is, though, that that's entirely up to us. That is entirely in our hands, and that's been an inspiring thing to engage with the tribes here in your land, and to listen and hear how hard that has been pushed variously around the country. Clearly it needs a unified vision. Clearly it needs to have agreement reached between the different layers of our societies. It needs the involvement of the people of our societies and nations, but it also needs new institutional arrangements. We are looking to pursue a strategy of constitutional reimagination. We hope to see the day when in fact the Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi, can be entrenched, and we're doing that through a number of different strategies which I won't belabor here. This is my last slide. We are seeking transformation, though. We're not willing to wait another 100 years. With the hope that had arisen out of the last 50 years of truth and reconciliation, the progress made, my tribe settled with the Crown with historical treaty breaches 10 years ago. At 2 cents in the dollar, we got $75 million. We employed a small number of people in health and small number in social services. Today, less than 10 years later, We have total assets of over $1 billion, $1.1 billion. We employ directly over 500 people in a horizontally integrated ecosystem of housing and health and education and food and social services. We have a similar number employed in a vertically integrated ecosystem of commercial enterprises, of infrastructure companies, of housing companies, of others that are delivering directly in the creation of the community that we want to live in, because we have a vision that the city we live in, which numbers about 65,000 people, of which only 2,000 or 3,000 are our tribe. We have a vision that that city will be known as the best place in Aotearoa to live, to raise a family, and we're investing directly in the creation and realization of that vision. In other words, in the words of my friend here, we're looking to act and think and increasingly talk like we are a sovereign nation in the lands of our ancestors. We're encouraged by what we've learned here. We know it needs resources, we know it needs leadership, but we know that that's enabled significantly when we have allies. It's an interesting thing to see how politicians change their tune when their poor decisions get on the international stage. And we welcome the friendships that we're creating here in this part of the world. Can I conclude by offering, in reciprocation to the generosity of time, information, insights and support we've received, we are on the same journey. We have learned much, as you have learned much, and we would welcome the opportunity with any and all of you to share both what we've learned, what we have, so we can reinvent as few wheels as possible, so that the final day, Whiti Te Rā, the new day that we're looking all to dawn for our children and our grandchildren, is one that they will thank us for doing what we are doing to create for them. Kia ora no tātou. Now rely on my friends here to tell me what song we're going to sing.
Thank you very much to our Marion delegation. My apologies for calling you earlier the New Zealand delegation, which was inappropriate. Thank you again to our friends at USAT for arranging such a rich cultural exchange and supporting that. We are going to invite our next speaker to the stage, who is another brilliant Indigenous leader. I thought that statement of a new dawn was wonderful. And so I'd like to invite Mary Adelzadaya, who is a member of the Navajo Nation. She is also the Senior Program Officer for the First Nations Development Institute. She is categorically brilliant, and I'm really excited for you to hear all of her insights and her wisdom. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? So again, I'm Mary Adelzada. I am Navajo. I am Tutsoni, which is the Big Water Clan. It's such a pleasure to be here. I want to express my profound gratitude to the Sovereign Nations of Virginia for the invitation to speak, but also gratitude to the Rappahannock tribe, specifically Chief Richardson, for her partnership on this conservation easement project. So I was born and raised in northern Arizona. And growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. They were very traditional. and spend a lot of weekends spending time learning some of their agriculture techniques and the traditional knowledge, and really rooted to the land that was that my grandparents were raised on and my family was raised on. And when I went off to college, when I returned, we were going through this Navajo Hopi land dispute. And in this process, my grandparents got relocated to a new area in New Mexico, away from the Black Mesa. It was an area that was unrecognizable to me and to my grandparents. It had a different soil, smell, and texture. Everything looked different about it. And with that was a loss of a lot of those stewardship responsibilities that had taken place previously on the lands that we known intimately. And since this time, I've become very, very interested in returning land to tribes and land access. This has been a whole focus of my career and also academic education. As a graduate student at the University of Michigan over 20 years ago, I did look at tribal co-stewardship, one of the first agreements that were entered into back in 1998 between the Washoe tribe and the U.S. Forest Service that gave them back access to Lake Tahoe, a place that they had been completely removed from. This mixed bay meadow allowed them to come back and restore their traditional knowledge in the management of their traditional territories. And I only share this because this has been an interest throughout my career that I've always pursued and wanting to seek and learn more about. Previously, I also served in an organization that was founded out of Pacific Gas and Electric Company's bankruptcy settlement. This was where, as part of that settlement, over 400,000 acres of land that was previously being potentially used for hydroelectric development in the Sierra Nevadas was going to be protected and preserved for public conservation values. And as part of that, conservation easements were going to be placed on all of those lands, and they were going to be donated to entities. And of course, in my role in this project, it was like this land needs to go back to the tribes. And throughout the 4 years working on this project, it became very evident that these conservation easements were big barriers to the tribes. I now find myself serving as the director of the Stewarding Native Lands program at First Nations Development Institute. And in my lifelong pursuit of learning, I am also a PhD student at the University of California at Berkeley, where I am studying land tenure and how to break through some of these barriers that have been big problems for tribes. So I want to start off, I'm going to be giving an introduction to First Nations Development Institute, the Stewarding Native Lands program, and the Woven Lands Initiative. To start, I think it's really important to share why we are doing this work and where we are at today in this work. The project I also want to spend a bit more time on is our Advancing Tribal Conservation Easement project, and then what some of the issues and opportunities that are growing in this area. And then I don't know if I'm going to have time for questions, but I hope I do, but maybe not. We'll see. So First Nations, our mission is to uplift and sustain the lifeway and economies of Native communities through advocacy, financial support, and knowledge sharing. We are a Native-led nonprofit. We were founded in 1980. We're headquartered in Longmont, Colorado, but we also have satellite offices in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and in California. We have 52 staff members. We launched our grant making in 1993, and we have issued over $94 million to date in grants. Our whole purpose and organization does serve only tribes and Native-led nonprofits. We have a variety of strategies. We're not just about grant making. We really want to make sure the projects and tribes and communities that we support, they're able to sustain those projects and opportunities and really grow them as well. So we offer a lot of technical assistance, trainings, we do convenings and webinars, we do research on best practices and models to share and to inspire the work nationwide. We do a lot of coalition building and fellowships, and then a big part of our work is advocacy. And this is advocacy to both the federal agencies, but also to philanthropy, to really demonstrate where the investment should be given to tribes and Native communities. And we have 5 different program areas. Native arts, language and knowledge, our native agriculture and food systems investments, research advocacy for native economic justice, and the California Tribal Fund, which is focused on the unique issues of California tribes. And then the core program that I serve, the Stewarding Native Lands program. And all of these programs, they are holistic. We all partner with them. There's a lot of overlap in the service that we provide. And central to all of this work is land. Land is a central piece to seeing the success of all of these programs. So at the Stewarding Native Lands program, we are the newest program at First Nations Development Institute. It was launched in 2020, and it was really this ongoing request and need around the areas of stewardship, land access, and land return. Before we launched the program, we did an environmental scan. We interviewed over 100 of our tribal partners, community representatives, to find out what the priorities need, what the focus needs are, what was not being met. So that's how it started to shape the Stewarding Native Lands program, and it was really important that the emphasis was stewardship. That was where the real investment needed to be, investment in Native stewardship of their homelands. And so that's what centers our mission and vision. We do envision a future where Native stewardship is woven into all the lands, nourishing vibrant ecosystems and communities. We do have specific targeted impacts. All of these, again, even though land return is central at the top one, it's all rooted in the success of all of the impacts, which is permanent protection of culturally significant land and water, increasing Native stewardship and use of traditional knowledge and practices, growing Native economies through sustainable development, and strengthening community health and well-being. We do working towards those impacts through these 5 SNL initiatives. Our initiatives, again, just like our program areas, are holistic and do support each other, but we do support environmental sovereignty and justice, which is focused on protecting communities and lands from harmful practices, projects, and policies. Stewardship, which is about sustainably managing and restoring lands for our communities and future generations. Climate, which is focused on addressing ongoing and anticipated impacts of climate change to preserve lands and cultural lifeways. We have our Community Pathways Initiative, which is all about intergenerational knowledge exchange and youth programming. And the Woven Lands Initiative, which is about creating new models, investments, and other tools to secure and expand Native ownership and stewardship over their tribal homelands. Now, the Woven Lands Initiative, that's the newest one. It started about 3 years ago through an initial conversation and through money from the Doris Duke Foundation and the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropy. They funded us as initial concept, which was a conservation toolbox. It was kind of the focus of it was to have these dialogues and conversations with people in a room about what would it look like to reimagine Western conservation frameworks. These Western conservation frameworks never were inclusive of tribal values or respected tribal sovereignty. From a legal or cultural perspective, they left tribes out. So we wanted to look at some of them and see if there's a way to reimagine what they offer, or maybe potentially create new avenues that would be even better to serve tribes' interest around land return and access. So we had a room that included our partners, the Native American Rights Fund, because we were also looking at a lot of legal instruments. And we had conversations around these 4 main topics, where it was direct land return, focused on tribal co-stewardship and co-management, primarily with federal agencies, all the land managing agencies, but also looking at state avenues as well for co-stewardship. We also were starting to talk about conservation easements, and then also conservation finance, because there's quite a bit of conservation funding available, but often not available to tribes to put their stewardship out at large landscape scales across their homelands. So these are the 4 key areas that we wanted to address through the Woven Lands Initiative. And some of the things that we talked about are what were the opportunities to restore stewardship and fund stewardship across really large tribal landscapes. And hence, this is the name, Woven Lands. It's actually looking at all the different treaty rights, different other legal policies and authorities, reserved and retained rights off the reservation, looking at pulling them all together and weaving back tribal authority over their traditional homelands. And this was an opportunity to really look and think about how we were going to pilot this out, how we were going to get this information out widely in a new, different way. And one of the examples that I wanted to share that serves as a model for how this is being done is a model that's being led by the Karuk tribe. This is a map. The Karuk tribe is located in northern California. They have a very, very limited land base. They've lost that. This is, in California, the history where their treaties were never ratified. In addition to that, they're also a termination state where their recognition was taken away in the 50s and then reinstated. But through this process, they've lost a lot of their land base. But through some of the restorative initiatives, they did develop an ecocultural resource management plan that looked at all of their traditional territories, and they started to rebuild mechanisms through tribal co-stewardship with federal agencies like the Forest Service. They started looking at other partner groups and other landholders, thinking about how they were going to reacquire some of those key properties and strategizing around that. And what they've been able to do is generate a lot more being central in the placement of all stewardship activities that's being taken place within their traditional region. And this is being recognized by a lot of the nonprofits, environmental NGOs, state and local governments. They are key and central. None of this work is getting done without the tribes. And I think we see this more and more often today, with the Klamath Dam removal. For decades, NGOs, these environmental non-government organizations, were trying to lead to get this dam removed, but those things don't happen unless the tribes lead it. And so this provides a really different opportunity to look at the different scales of this work, but also how to get the funding to support that kind of scale of work. And so through some of these authorities, through tribal co-stewardship and co-management, we were looking at 638 contracting, a whole bunch of other funding mechanisms where we could really draw bigger funding in to support this level of stewardship work. And this work advances through one of our projects, the Advancing Tribal Conservation Easement Project. We started this project. We have 6 pilots that we're working on. And as part of all of our project areas, we've assembled a legal and policy cadre. These are attorneys across the nation that have a lot of expertise and experiences within this area. So we have one for our tribal co-stewardship and co-management. We've also formed one around tribal conservation easements, which I'm very pleased to say that Thomas Lindsay, who presented this morning on the rights of nature, is a part of that cadre. And this is really an opportunity to build and learn and exchange to really advance and push the envelope on what's happening. It's really exciting to see that these attorneys are providing technical assistance to tribes, but they're also bringing it back to a hub that can share and exchange and get more of this growth out there across the country. So with the Advancing Tribal Conservation Easement Project, the focus of it was to build tribal capacity to hold conservation easements for land protection, cultural resource protection, community access and stewardship, explore opportunities for conservation easement equivalents on tribal trust lands, ensure conservation easement respects tribal sovereignty and values. And this is so needed, 'cause something at this scale has never happened before. And so a conservation easement, Thomas described it this morning, but it is a legal agreement that restricts land use and development to support conservation values on the property. And there's quite a bit of these conservation easements that have occurred. I think I was looking at the National Conservation Database that was last updated early this year. There's over 210,000 conservation easements across the country, covering 39 million acres. There's also a lot of funding that goes into these conservation easements to either get them purchased or partially purchased. This funding comes from the federal government, it comes from state, it comes from philanthropy, and there's also quite a bit of just landowners that are doing donations as well of these conservation easements. And this has been an opportunity that's been largely, tribes have not largely been engaged in. For a number of reasons that I'm going to share. And partly too, some of the experiences that I've heard from the tribes, and even experiences in, describing these conservation easements and opportunities for tribes. Sometimes I get a lot of pushback from some of the NGOs or the land trusts that are involved in this space. And partly, there's always a question of, well, tribes don't want to hold the easement. Like, why would they want to hold a conservation easement? It's like, well, first, never presume like what a tribe's interests are. But I think, secondly, the bigger question is, because, there's a presumption that this role is really relegated to just monitoring the values on the land, the conservation values on the land. And that's typically what a land trust do. Like when they accept a conservation easement, they get an endowment to continue to monitor that property. And typically easements are in perpetuity, but they monitor the property annually and they report like, yes, there was no housing development, no, this was intact, there's no disturbance. And so that's the role. And so, there's been some pushback saying, why would a tribe want to do that? And I think, there's many examples of why, and there's also many frameworks and newer models of conservation easements that are coming up. That's really exciting to see. For instance, like cultural conservation easements, partly because the idea of tribal cultural heritage being protected by a private organization in itself is an issue. No one knows those cultural resources, the tribe's cultural heritage. No one knows that but the tribe itself and its community members, and they're the ones that should hold that responsibility, and that is their stewardship responsibility too, and to be able to have access on it. So just going back and just an overview of what conservation easements do provide. So it is a non-possessory right in land that seeks to yield conservation benefits. Like I said, it's usually perpetual and it reduces the market value on the property, and that's usually why the property landowner wants to engage in it, because they can get generous tax deductions or sometimes financial incentives. And these financial incentives, like I mentioned before, come from funders, including state and federal programs. I was looking up, trying to find a figure on like how much money state and federals have gone into it. It's pretty significant. Just states alone have invested $5.5 billion in agricultural easements. So it is a pretty big, area of getting funding. It also is a very well-established and dominant Western tool for conservation. And I'm going to share some of the main challenges and, and the opportunity that we're trying to pilot and see how to address them and work through them through our Advancing Tribal Conservation Easement project. So the first one is housing. So with the conservation easement, the main purpose is to, restrict land use and development for conservation values. And so in that, there's typically a restriction on any kind of housing development. They usually require a building envelope saying you're relegated and you can only use this specific area. But what Native people know is that being on the land and stewarding the land is so critically important. Stewardship of land is very intensive practice. It's a big responsibility, and that requires a day-to-day being on the land, being part of that land, and building relationship to land. And so part of this is looking at avenues where lands that are protected for conservation value, it's recognizing that the people, the Native stewardship is a part of those conservation values as well that we are looking to address. And especially since housing is such an important issue for Native communities and the limited land base too, it's so important to thinking about how people can live on these properties that are being protected. We're also looking at some of the state codes. So all the conservation easements are overseen by state code and also dictates who can hold a conservation easement. There's only, I think, 1 or 2 states that specifically by code states that a tribe could hold a conservation easement. Otherwise, other states specifically just say governments, which is presumed that includes tribes, that tribes are governments, and so they fit into that definition. And then there's a couple states that actually don't allow governments. That's New Mexico and I think New Hampshire. And so part of this project is to kind of test that to see if how can a tribe who's never pushed that in one of these states to see if they really would serve that definition of being a government and holding a conservation easement. One of the other issues with conservation easements is when you're conveying some of the rights to the property. There is often a limited waiver of sovereign immunity to make sure that the terms of the conservation easement can be enforced. And this would be taking a lot of tribes to state court. This was a big issue in the work that I did under Pacific Gas and Electric. A lot of tribes did not want to hold those lands where they're going to be burdened to be taken to court by PG&E over those lands in the future. This is a serious issue. One of the things that we're looking at is what are the opportunities for dispute resolution systems that wouldn't require a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. And then there's also this lingering question about placing land into trust. There has never been, that I am aware of, and in our cadre as well, that has there been land that's been encumbered by a conservation easement that has been able to be placed into trust. I think that's been a reluctant thing of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, of taking land into trust that's encumbered by a legal agreement. But there has to be some workaround that. Oftentimes in some of these land donations, that is a requirement that these lands have a conservation easement to protect those conservation values, and that really places the tribes in a predicament. The capacity, one of the issues that we've experienced recently is often the tribes do have a desire and they want to get their land returned to them, but they may not have the capacity. So we're looking at an avenue to where they can have a partner they could reverse their relationship. So where the tribe is the easement holder, and then another organization, trusted organization, is the landowner, and when they have the capacity, they could switch roles. That way the tribe will have their desire eventually when they feel like they're ready to take that on. And then another issue with conservation easements and placing conservation easements is there's been an emergence, and this is not new. There's a lot of native land trust organizations, and these are nonprofit organizations. Some of them may be a charter organization of the tribe. But sometimes if they're a nonprofit organization, they have a entirely independent board of the tribe and sometimes of the community. And so there's been questions of a nonprofit organization that is a native land trust, but are they actually serving and connected to the tribe? Is this truly land back? Is this truly land return if it's not going directly to the tribe? So we are looking so some tribes do have that authority and they have been setting up their own native land trust, an organization that works in tandem on these issues. But for the most part, we want to make sure how can we support tribal sovereignty and making sure that the land that's going back is truly going back and being served to native interests. And then the other piece of it is funding, like what is available for tribes. There's quite a bit of conservation funding that's out there. We did a scan of all the funding, looking at all the state funding, federal funding, just all across the country, and looking at do they require matching funds? When are the deadlines? What are the restrictions on it? And even to see if tribes were eligible for some of these funding sources. And not surprisingly, tribes are often excluded from being applied to these state and federal opportunities, or if it's through a federal government program, oftentimes they have to apply through their state in order to access those funds. That's something that we really do want to change and bring more visibility to it, and we're hoping that some of these pilot projects will be able to touch specifically on these issues. And so growing opportunities, this is the really exciting part of it. You know, Thomas Lindsay talked about one big opportunity in the rights of nature. We are really excited that one of the projects in our pilot, they are the Wind River, Shoshone and Arapaho tribes at Wind River Reservation. They are the first to designate the buffalo as a wild animal, and they are looking at building out connectivity across a landscape to restore their historic migratory routes. There's an opportunity for us to be looking at how conservations can be used to piece access for the buffalo to cross some of those properties. We're working with a whole bunch of other wonderful grantees as well. But I think the main thing that we're learning from in this space is the need for a national Native-led organization. And First Nations, we are starting to form this. We have a working group that is established, and we're looking at all the issues, like what is the opportunities for alternative dispute resolution? Can this organization serve as a landholder and help support acquisitions of large properties and hold them and transfer the tribe to the tribes? How do we navigate and fundraise for large and immediate land acquisitions? This is a big perplexing thing because land sells quickly, and it's oftentimes tribes are in a position to gather that much funding to be able to make that purchase. I know we've experienced some of this too in our work. We our partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, we were supporting the Community Forest Program. And this program, the Forest Service provides 50% matching funds for tribes that want to purchase land to establish a community forest program. You know, as part of our advocacy piece, there's a lot of lessons learned and our encouragements. This is a congressional program, so it's hard to change of how this program operates, but there was so many barriers for tribes being able to get a successful project through, and mainly a big part of that was being able to have a landowner that was willing to sell, that was lined up to the timeline of their grant application and their decision-making process. And so we had worked with one tribe in Northern California, and they put together an amazing proposal. This proposal was rated, I think, the highest that year, but it was a tribe that had been completely removed from their coastal lands and were now inland in California. This property had become available for sale along the coast, right adjacent to McRecker State Park, and it also had trail access and ocean access. And this was during a time when the fires in California, the wildfires, were pretty severe, and the only reprieve that people can get is going to the coastlands. Otherwise, you were just drowning in smoke. And so having this opportunity for the community to be able to go back to their coastlands to harvest and be there. And the most astonishing thing is this also land was previously part of a tribal reservation that had been terminated. And so they had everything all lined up, and then somebody came in and purchased the property, and that property instead now has a house on it, and it's for someone's private use. And it was only because they couldn't align the funding quick enough that this happened. And so this was a lesson learned, even though they got this Forest Service funding to support this project, they weren't able to get it quick enough to be able to purchase the property. And so all of this is to say that we are looking to launch this. It's going to be an organization that's going to be a subsidiary of First Nations. And I think it's going to offer so much at a national scale to looking at address some of the issues that I mentioned, but also looking at bequeathing property. I think over the number of the years, I get calls from all over the place where people want to connect with tribes. They want to thinking about repatriation and thinking about, hey, I have this land. I don't know. I don't have any connection to the tribe. How do I get it to them? How do I get in contact? And so we are always making those introductions and making sure they get connected to the right tribe. But I think at a larger scale, if this was an opportunity more visible, I think people would take up and be more proactive about it. And so that we see that as a main function of connecting landowners to tribes. I do want to offer my contact information. Like I mentioned before, our whole purpose is to serve tribes and Native communities. We're always looking for partners. It's great to be here on the East Coast and connect with many of you. I'd love to share more about the Woven Lands Initiative. We do have a listserv we send out, and we have a weekly digest that goes out every Friday, and it always lists our grant opportunities. It highlights the projects that our partners, our tribal partners and Native communities are working on. And we'd love to get you connected with that information. And here is, some more with our social media tags as well. Do we have time for questions? Okay, doesn't sound like there's any questions, but please come see me afterwards if you have any individual questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. I'd also like to say that the Indigenous Conservation Council is looking to partner with the First Nation Development Institute on one of those areas of work that Mary talked about. So wonderful partner, I need to speak into this mic, and it's recording into this mic, which is very confusing. So I apologize. I'm going to ask us to do a little activity right now, which is I would like all of our tribal citizens and Indigenous people to stand to be recognized in the room, if you could. All right. Wonderful. And for all of our non-native allies and partners, if you could now stand and be recognized in the room. just to say that if you've been in some of these rooms before, that's a pretty unusual mix. So that was your break, just FYI, there's no more break. For those of you on the call, I hope you stood up as well. Thank you so much, and honestly, I do want to take this moment. I know we keep thanking the Rappahannock Tribe, but I would like to thank all of the sponsors as well for facilitating this free conference, so the lunch that you had, all of these wonderful speakers. This has been brought to you so that as an educational opportunity and a gift to you. So just like thank you to the tribe, thank you to everyone who's facilitated this conference, and a big, huge thank you to our sponsors. Are really okay, so we're going to go on to our next session, and this gentleman has come to be really a great friend and colleague of many of the tribes in Virginia. His name is Sean Watts. He's the director of the U.S. Indigenous Guardians Network for the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. He also serves as the director of Tribal Law and Government Center, Tribal Judicial Support Clinic, and Mediation Clinic at the University of Kansas School of Law. Sean is a Cherokee citizen, is that correct? Yes. He is a truly quiet giant in conservation, and has bin quietly making waves. Maybe not quietly, maybe you've been doing it quite loudly. But it is my pleasure we have had Sean come and speak to us at the Indigenous Conservation Council, and he's going to speak to us about Indigenous Guardians, which you're hearing about these wonderful models of pan-tribal sovereignty, which I loved. This is an excellent example of one of those great emerging and return of Indigenous guardianship across the world. Please welcome Sean to the mic.
Talk to this one.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. All right. It's good to see everyone. I am going to try to actually end a little bit early so that you can get, I know when I'm at a conference and someone is speaking and I leave the room, I feel bad about that. Maybe you don't, but I feel bad about that. And so I'm going to try to end a little early so that you can have a little bit of a break where you can leave quickly and come back and have a bathroom stop. It's really great to be here. I'm coming from hopping on a flight at 6 a.m. this morning in Minneapolis, where there was a gathering of a bunch of leaders, tribal leaders, indigenous NGOs, to meet with the Native American Rights Fund to talk about their new Homelands Initiative. And that's really a coalition of a lot of groups who are interested in protecting the lands that tribes have under their own control, but also public lands that are traditional territory of tribes, so that we can be able to ensure that sacred sites, culturally significant places are being taken care of, not being lost control, and especially in this age that we find ourselves in now, where many of our public lands are being offered for sale and under new policies of the current administration. So ICC would be an awesome partner in that Homelands coalition, because it's really going to be crucial to making sure that we are able to keep tribal lands in tribal control, and more importantly, keep public lands public, so that we all, indigenous and non, can continue to enjoy the bounty of our natural resources. It is my great honor to get to be here, because I met Chief Ann a few years ago at a biodiversity funders group meeting, and is it okay to say had like a little bit of crush right away, and then it's just maintained itself over the years? Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, she's just dynamic and powerful, and it's, I have my daughter's a tribal citizen as well. We're citizens of the Cherokee Nation. It's always awesome for me to see women who I can very easily and confidently say, if you grow up to be half that, I'll have done a good job as a parent. So very happy to get to meet Chief Ann. And that, of course, developed into a relationship with Melissa and the entire ICC, where we have now been discussing how to incorporate Guardians programs into the 7 tribes we now have here in Virginia. And I will say right up front, you're probably going to hear me make this mistake, which I make all the time, and then I have to go correct myself. When I talk about the Virginia tribes, I do that now quite a bit because I use the ICC and the 7 tribes as a positive example of exactly what regaining control of reestablishing sovereignty can be. And I frequently describe them as our 7 newest tribes. And then I always have to correct myself and say, no, they're not new. They've been there the whole time. It's the U.S. federal government who's only now rightfully recognizing the sovereignty that these tribes have been acting with the entire time. And so really happy to be in partnership with the ICC and the 7 tribes here. One of the things I did just about 2 weeks ago, and I hope this inures to your benefit here, is have a conversation. When I say conversation, it was me lecturing for 4 hours. So that's no fun for anyone. I won't do that today. With the Chesapeake Area Funders Network. Is anyone on any of those webinars, by the way? Okay. So you guys are bored of hearing me talk. As soon as I said a word, you're always like, oh, not this guy again, right? And the idea behind that conversation was to provide a framework for funders in your area to be able to understand what legal rights tribes have, why those legal rights are actually advantageous for anyone who has conservation goals, anyone who's hoping to protect the environment, and really why tribes can be amazing partners in these endeavors. And so for those of you who sat through that already, this is going to be some new-ish material, but if you get bored and do need to walk away, I completely get it. I can tell you, I think I said this to them at the time, I have a wife and a daughter, so I have lots and lots of data points about how no one wants to listen to me talk. So I will try to be quick. So Guardians, maybe take a moment to explain some of the history. Guardians are coming to the U.S. as a formal group, as a new thing, though I will say we'll talk about why we've had Guardians the whole time and how formalizing that actually is an advantage for us. Guardians began in Australia as something called Rangers. So lots of Indigenous folks around the world will call their programs different things. In Australia, it was Rangers. The Rangers actually were kind of prodded along and pushed along with help from our Maori friends that are sitting over here with us today. So really, really helpful to have them in the mix. Those programs, so what Rangers are actual on-the-ground environmental stewards. And so we have conversations about conservation. We think when we're working in funders networks or even with NGOs talking about conservation goals, and we say lofty words like sustainability and sovereignty and all those things. But at the end of the day, the goal is to make sure that the land is healthy and usable for our tribal citizens. And to do that, somebody actually has to do the work. As I've tried to use it as an example, we can talk about why it's important to have a beautiful garden. But at the end of the day, for that to happen, somebody has to walk to the spigot and turn it on, right? Someone actually has to do the work, and that is where Guardians come into play. Guardians, Rangers, Sentinels, they are on the ground environmental stewards working for the benefit of tribes. Typically, they are citizens or members of the tribes for whom they're doing the work, but sometimes they're partners in tribal coalitions just like the ICC, who may be able to provide some of that on the ground work, but they're actually doing the things. And so, I know the ICC is very interested in water around the Chesapeake Bay area, watershed area, and why that matters. Somebody has to actually go out and measure the amount of parasites in the water, what the water quality is like, what the bacteria level is. That has to be entered into some sort of database. Somebody then has to organize that in a database so that it's usable data, so that someone else can analyze that data and we can get a real sense of what our water quality is like here. And that may not just be on our land, but it's got to be the land outside of it, of course, because of course water is mobile. So that's sort of what Guardians do. When it started in Australia as a Rangers program, it was really kind of disconnected, and more disconnected because some of the outside non-Aboriginal forces, non-First Australian forces, at work really trying to partner with the programs there in such a way that to keep them divided as opposed to united. Where Australia became successful is when those programs decided to start working together. The Rangers programs at the individual community, Indigenous community level decided to start working together. Once that unity happened, the programs became successful. That then translated itself into Canada. Canada took the idea that the Rangers started with, because several of some NGO folks who had worked on the Rangers programs in Australia already had partnerships for conservation programs like boreal forest preservation, etc., in Canada. And so the idea that there could be a program, a united program of Guardians, started to take shape. One of the things that we saw in Canada, and we're seeing this here, by the way, in the US, is there are already people, tribal nations, doing the very things that we need them to be doing to take care of the land. Of course, they're not being recognized for that. They're not getting funding to do that for the most part. Where that funding exists, it is way under-resourced. So the capacity to make the program successful, to be as robust as they need to be successful, doesn't exist. And so what Canada did was network those programs together. They started with 30. When they began, they have 30. This was about 15 years ago. Began to network those programs together so they could do all the important things that networks do for groups, which is helps them share knowledge. So that what one group knows, another group can then learn and understand and deploy and be effective with. Sharing knowledge also means you're sharing experiences and you're sharing tactics. So you can share your successes, but much more importantly, you're able to share your failures so that when you go through, anybody ever build IKEA furniture? I mean, the little cartoon is cute, but it's never helpful, right? Like, this is sticking in my head because I just moved about 2 months ago, and I don't know about you guys, but the trauma from moving sticks with me for several years afterwards. The amount of things that I end up getting rid of when I move out, I'll tell you, I never hate myself as much as when I move. I'm just going through items going, when did I become the kind of person who thinks it's okay to have one of these, much less 5 of this thing that I have, right? So one of the things I had discovered about IKEA furniture is if I'm building 2 or 3 of the same piece, the second piece only takes me about a quarter of the time it took me to build the first piece. And the third piece may only take me about an eighth of the time, and then I'm just rocking and rolling after that. That's exactly what networks can do for you. They provide you the opportunity to have gotten to experience from someone else's point of view a piece of furniture being built, so that when you go and do it, you don't take as much time. And more importantly, the failures. I don't know about you guys, but with IKEA furniture, when they have slide-out drawers, I can never get all of them to go all the way in or out, right? It just never works. But if I had an example of somebody else to guide me, I could avoid that mistake so that all my drawers would work the first time. That's what networks do for people. And so those Guardians programs provided networks for education, knowledge sharing. One of the very important things that the Guardians Network did in Canada was provide a united political voice. And what that united political voice did was something that our Maori friends talked about as well, right? They're saying they're 20% of the population. Now that's obviously not a majority, but that number is large enough if you can vote or raise your voice in a coalition as a united bloc. That ends up and does. I work on elections here in the US for tribal nations, and those blocs do end up turning elections. And we saw in 2020, Arizona, New Mexico, were huge. The tribal vote there was the voting in a coalition was a huge reason that the election went the way it did. What Canada was able to do is, as they grew these programs out, started to be able to speak with the United Political Voice, and that turned into some really aggressive action by the Canadian government in helping to work towards some better support and equality of the First Nations there. So if you guys saw a few years ago in Canada, like 6 or 7 years ago, there was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that came out of Canada. We in the US are far behind that. The closest we got was Secretary Holland went through and did the boarding school study, and that was a big deal for the US. We all know it's on the back burner now, but there will be a time when it comes back, and the fact that that study has already been done is going to be really valuable to us in the end. That Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada was a product of the First Nations there, including the Guardians program, speaking with United Political Voice and applying pressure to the Canadian federal government. Other things that they were able to do once they were started being able to speak with the United Political Voice was actually get legislation on the books that would recognize Indigenous rights. They were able to create a thing that didn't exist in Canada before called Indigenous Preserved and Conserved Areas. So these are large swaths of land where not only are they preserved and conserved, but the people in control of that conservation effort, the monitoring, all the things that go along with it, are the Indigenous communities where those conserved areas exist. But very critically, what they were able to do successfully was lobby, you speak with United Political Voice for funding to support those programs. So we talked about before the idea that we can talk about our conservation goals, we can talk about what it means to have a beautiful garden, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to go turn on the spigot. And that person, just because they're Indigenous, shouldn't have to do that for free. That we create jobs when we create Guardians programs. Like, Guardian is a paid position. It's not something we're volunteering to do. I should say, we're all volunteering to do it now. It's not something we should. It's not morally correct, and it's not judiciously correct for us to be having to do that without compensation. To have another day job and then come home and take care of our land when we're exhausted at the end of the day afterwards. And so what these Guardians programs do is provide funding, and they were so successful in Canada that two things have happened. They have gotten close to $1 billion Canadian. I realize in American money that's like 77 cents or something, but they've gotten $1 billion Canadian out of the federal government to actually support these Guardians programs, and they have been able to partner with take that public sector money, partner with private sector money to create things called projects for finance permanence. What these are large endowments for a given territory that is just a huge pot of money. When I say huge pot of money, I mean like $400 million pot of money, so that those programs can exist and steward that land in perpetuity. But it's the tribal communities there, the First Nations communities there, who are the ones who get to do that in the end. So they're in control of that. So that's how kind of Canada happened. Once Canada was up and running and very successful, the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, who had been responsible for helping to get that up and running, got the network spun off into its own entity, and so now they have stayed on as the advocacy wing and continue to engage with the Canadian federal government, and thought, we've got Australia rocking and rolling, Canada is just a machine at this point, we need the US to come into the fold here, because let's face it, Canada, the United States, and Australia, despite whatever egregious actions other countries around the world have taken, we're the three biggest offenders. When it comes to Indigenous people, we're the three biggest offenders. If we, all three of us, can have these programs rolled out at scale, being largely successful, then what we can do then is apply pressure globally, exerting our ability to come around to the right way of thinking for a global Guardians network, so that Indigenous peoples are treated better around the globe, not just here at home. So the idea was to start to build a network here. That's what we have been doing. We've been trying to build a network. That network approach for us has resulted in sort of trying to target specific regions where we have some advantages in those regions. So in the Pacific Northwest, for instance, we're working with a network there. The Pacific Northwest region is that they are treaty tribes. When I say treaty tribes, it doesn't mean they just have a treaty, it means their recognition as a tribe comes through their treaty, and that gives a whole different and more robust set of rights. The 7 tribes here are recognized by statute, which is a different mechanism for being recognized, and sort of changes what that looks like in the end. Alaska, on the other hand, is another area that we've been looking at. Alaska is really important because Alaska has, I want to say, 40% of all the federal public land in the U.S. So Alaska's just got massive swaths of land. Alaska also has another 25% of Alaska is state public land. And despite being, I think, a state that people might think is antagonistic to indigenous rights, and certainly historically has sort of been that way, Alaska actually, their state legislature works well together, right and left. Doesn't look like that on a national stage, but internally they do. And where there is alignment, they work well with the indigenous communities, and to our great fortune, where Alaska's tribal communities and Alaska's more conservative elements, our alignment is on the idea of conservation. So Alaska is very into the idea that we should protect our species, that we should protect our natural resources. Alaska is very much into oil drilling too, but very much into the idea that we should protect those things because so many people in Alaska, indigenous and otherwise, live from the land. California is another great place where we've started to establish a network. California's advantage is the state government is very amenable to conservation in general, and even more amenable to indigenous conservation. So tribally led conservation in California is really moving quickly, and so building out networks that way. And then of course, the ICC, your 7 tribes here in Virginia, are a really important area of focus for us because there's a huge desire. The advantage there is that you want to be doing this work. You want to be a partner, and you're just looking for support. And so that's how this partnership came to be, and we're very happy to be in it. The reason I think it's critical for Virginia to develop and build its own Guardians programs is because Guardians are the most effective, tribal stewardship is the most effective form of stewardship, and the science bears that out. That's not just me coming here and telling you. The numbers bear that out. There are studies that indicate that 80% of the remaining biodiversity left on the planet Earth is in the 12% of land stewarded by indigenous people. 65% of the intact forests that remain are on the about 5% of land stewarded by indigenous people. On top of that, numerous study after study. So they do these mega studies, which is where they take a bunch of studies and look at them, like several hundred studies at once. And all the evidence says that the conservation outcomes, the environmental outcomes, when you have indigenous peoples involved, especially when you let indigenous governance lead the way, which is how we behave, how we act, how we treat one another, our processes, when those lead the way, the outcomes are significantly greater than when other people do it. And critically, when indigenous people engage in conservation, it's actually less expensive to do because we're just better at it. It's honestly what it comes down to. And a very easy example of that is, and this happens all the time, the federal government spends lots of money on conservation. And what they will do frequently is, the University of Wisconsin has a very robust environmental science program. And so they will pay students from the University of Wisconsin, they'll give the university a massive grant. Those folks, the students in that program will fly to Alaska and try to do a bunch of environmental data collecting. The problem with that is flying to Alaska from anywhere is expensive, from Wisconsin, very expensive. Then when those students get there, they have to be housed somewhere. They have to be transported frequently to different places. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to get around in Alaska. It's not easy. Getting around intra-Alaska, getting to Alaska, not impossible, but not easy. Intra-Alaska is very difficult, even when it's not the winter. It's still very difficult to do. So that's a very expensive prospect. And then, when they go out on the land, the things that they're looking for sometimes run and hide. right? And so you're trying to count certain things, you're trying to get data, survey data of certain things, and those things aren't always interested in being counted by you. So that's a massive expense to be able to do that for results that aren't great. And the Guardian's theory is simply this: the indigenous people, the indigenous students who live in those communities know what the land is like. You don't have to pay to get them to Alaska in the first place. You don't have to pay to house them once they get them to Alaska because they already live there. You don't have to pay them to get them transported intra-Alaska because there are so many communities there. We can just engage each of the individual communities instead of having non-indigenous community members move throughout. And importantly, they know the land. They know the migratory patterns of the species. They know how the water moves. So the data that they collect is actually more robust data because they just know what the landscape looks like. They know how it all behaves. And so here's where I think we're now kind of getting to a place where it's time for us in this Chesapeake Bay Area and for you to start to be thinking about, we have these conservation goals, we have these environmental goals. How can we engage these goals in a way that will allow us to achieve them while still honoring, respecting, and frankly taking advantage of the sovereignty that these tribes have? Because they have sovereignty, they're going to be able to do things that you might not be able to do otherwise without going through certain very robust and difficult labyrinthine processes, which frankly our federal government isn't interested in helping you navigate at the moment. So that's where we are in this moment in time. It is now time for the entire U.S., but because you're so interested, the tribes in this area to be supported by the NGOs in the area, the environmental groups in the area, the state and local governments, to be able to do what we already know they're better at doing than most other groups, and that is taking care of their land, even though I know they have small land bases still, and then also being able to take care of the public land that are traditional territories for them. So that's what I'm here today to promote, the idea that you should be working in partnership with Chief Ann and the ICC to make sure that your conservation goals are achieved because of how you're able to work and partner with these groups. And if we do that, this moment in time where we're finding rollbacks of our commitment to our public natural resources, rollbacks in our commitments to people in general, you'll find that you'll be able to stave some of that off in a way that when the wheel finally turns, we won't be as far behind as we would have been if we didn't engage and really work deeply with our tribal partners. So I will take questions, and then I'll give you guys, if we do questions for a couple of minutes, that'll give you guys maybe 10 minutes to get out and get a break. Now, good. See, I was going to say you didn't have any questions for the last person, and I was like, oh, she just must be the best explainer in the world because I always have questions. So yes, please.
Yes, how the natives to protect themselves against the administration? I'm looking at the North Slope. It was environmentally protected for generations, and now the drill, baby drill. But it takes precedence over that stuff. How do we protect ourselves?
So that is a difficult question, and part of the reason is because we are in an unprecedented time in which even when we get court decisions that tell us that the administration should behave a certain way, that frequently gets ignored. I just don't think we've ever come across a point in history in the U.S. where the rule of law was so ignored, right? And so, but that doesn't mean we can't fight. You have to engage in constant legal challenges. That's one of the things that our network does, is we have deep legal knowledge, and the people who work with us and in conjunction with us. So one of the things we're doing with Natalie Landreth and Nita Culver, both who came out of the federal government, are making a sort of road show and introducing to as many tribal leaders as who want to participate and all the different legal mechanisms that they can use to protect the stewardship agreements that they already have, protect the areas that are important to them around, and then and actually get more legal authority to be able to do that. So that's the sort of hard part of it. The what do you do on a day-to-day basis is to continue to be out on your land and looking at it, continue to engage your tribal councils, whoever is responsible for creating and passing laws, making sure that they're engaging your state and national representatives, because speaking with a fairly large voice does end up working. I'm always shocked at how the squeaky wheel does end up getting the grease in the end. And so continue to engage. It may feel hopeless, look, if I'm being honest, it might even be hopeless, but engaging with your state and national representatives on a regular basis, they're the kind of people who at some point should dislike you. Right? You should be bothering them so much that finally it's just well, let's just give him what he wants and then maybe he'll stop talking. And so engage in that way. And then shore up all your own institutions, all the different processes that you purport to have to follow. If you're running federal grants, making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, making sure that every little receipt has exactly the information it has. Make yourself beyond reproach, and then just continue to advocate on a daily basis. It's not a satisfying answer, but that really is where we find ourselves. Another question.
Can you give us an idea of the numbers that's already on our rivers? We might have one or two river keepers. How many are we talking about?
That is a great question, and I think the complication in answering that is guardians is a catch-all and formal term that I don't think everyone is hip to at the moment. And so I will say this, every single tribe in America, all 574 of them, have at least one, and in many cases multiple, of the following: a tribal EPA office, a tribal natural resources division, a tribal historical preservation office, an officer. They may have a herd or some sort of actual land management program involving a species. They have fisheries managers, right? Every single tribe has at least one of those. Whether they know it or not, those folks are guardians. They might not call themselves guardians. They might not even know what guardians are, but they are the people on the ground doing the work. Typically the way these programs exist, and I always give this example of this one just incredible woman at one of the Alaskan Native tribes. This woman is one woman who runs the entire natural resources department. So that means she's an administrator. She's doing her own scheduling. She's doing all the paperwork in the federal grants. She is reporting out to tribal council. Just everything that she has to do. And on top of that, she is the lone person collecting data for this tribe, which means she snowshoes out when it's -40 and tracks, snow levels, branches on trees that have fallen, any remaining species that she can figure out. And I've said this to her face, and I think she understands this. What's going to happen is at some point in history, that woman is going to snowshoe out, she's going to turn an ankle, and she's going to freeze to death because no one's going to know where she is. And she knows that. She knows what that risk is like. And so the purpose of a Guardians program is to build out capacity so that woman is not snowshoeing out alone, so that she's not running all the federal grants on her own, so that she's not collecting all that data on her own. So I have kicked around the idea of having something called the 5740 campaign, 5740. The idea being there are 574 tribes, and that they each had 10 guardians, 10 working, roving the land, data collecting, data crunching guardians, that our environmental outcomes would be outstanding. Because think of what we've been able to do with almost no resources at all. If we could resource that. Now, look, in the end, the reason I call it a 5740 campaign is because it's an easy jingle to remember. There might be tribes who only need 3 or 4 guardians, and there might be tribes who need 15 guardians. But it's just an easy jingle to remember, and it's easy math to do. So the number of guardians, the truth is we still don't know. We're still doing an assessment. We do know about many of the programs that exist, but the number of employees in each of those programs, we don't quite know. And then there are informal guardians as well. I know you have them here because I've seen videos from the ICC. You've got people who are interested in making sure the water quality is here, so they are themselves, without being paid, without being an employee of the tribe, working directly with the tribes. They're tribal citizens working directly, but not an actual employee, out on the river, and they're usually taking a group of youth with them as well to make sure to just giving them, the youth, the opportunity to be more connected to their place, to be more connected to their culture, and frankly, to learn a little bit. One of the amazing things about Guardians programs is it is a workforce development program, because some of the things that you might need a Guardian to do need some actual educational credentialing, and so we have university partnerships to be able to do that. And even when they don't need educational credentialing, they still need skills building, so they might just get like a certificate in Excel or something where it's R, which is a programming language. So where it's clear to anyone outside of the community that these people actually have the skills to do this work. And what I love about the youth, involving the youth, is that what it means is the good solutions that we come up with and the great work we're doing today won't be lost, because there'll be a generation coming behind that can pick up the mantle of all the amazing work that we have these wonderful people doing now. And so continuing to sort of fund that idea of intergenerational solutions means that we're not going to find ourselves in a position where we are now in a spot in the world where we can only advance. Holding the line doesn't do it anymore. We've got about 15 years, and I think that's being a little generous, before we reach a tipping point with climate change where it won't matter what we do. There won't be a nature solution that will solve the problem. There will not be a technological solution of the problem that'll solve the problem. But about 15 years from now, if we haven't unsteepened the curve on temperature change, then we'll just all be waiting around to see how long it takes until we burst into flames. That's not, I say it flippantly, but that's really the situation we find ourselves in. And so youth are going to be critical to that, because we can't have a situation where we do a bunch of good work, we make some advances, and then there's a period of 10 or 20 years where there's no one to do the work because we forgot to bring the youth along with us. And so we just find ourselves exactly where we were before. Yes?
It's given our differences between U.S. structure to federal level. Do you think someday we the funding that we secure at Canada be possible in the U.S.? I'll let you talk about it.
I do. I actually am really confident that the funding mechanism will be successful. And the reason for that is there is a group of people in the U.S. who think morally the right thing to do is support tribal sovereignty. Who think morally the right thing to do is allow tribes to steward their own land, for sure, but provide support to do that, because we have the right to do that. Then it's just, do we have the capacity? But who also think it's morally correct for tribes to steward public lands that are traditional territory, so land that used to belong to the tribe, but through any number of nefarious actions no longer does. There is a contingent of people, and frankly, the previous administration was that contingent, right? The amount of support for tribal sovereignty and tribal stewardship that happened under the last administration was unprecedented. Now, I will not for a second say it wasn't partially self-interested. President Biden staked his entire legacy on this 30 by 30 initiative. Do you guys know what the 30 by 30? The idea is that by 2030, 30% of the land will be conserved and protected. When he did that, he didn't think, we actually don't have that much land as a federal government. We're going to have to work with private landowners and, more importantly, tribes to be able to make this happen. So the interest of that administration and tribes aligned really perfectly. We're no longer running parallel, which is a fine way to run with the federal government. At least you're not running at odds. We were no longer running parallel. We were on exactly the same track. And all that is to say, there is the moral case to the right crowd makes itself. So then the trick is, how do we win over the folks for whom the moral case doesn't make itself? And the simple answer to that is, and frankly the administration that we're working with now is the exact administration that we could target this to, is the business case. And Canada, one of Canada's great successes is they have done several and deep economic studies on the actual benefits of tribal stewardship, tribal conservation. And it turns out there's something like a 3-to-1 return. So for every dollar you invest in indigenous conservation, it turns out that you save $3 out of your federal budget. That business case will be an easy one to make here as well. We have an advantage Canada didn't have, which is we came second. We're coming after Canada. And so those mistakes that Canada made, we get to learn from those. And we're working with those people directly so they can tell us exactly which pitfalls to avoid. One of the things they didn't do was start collecting data first thing. We know to do that now. And we have great data scientists that we can work with on that. So what that will mean is 3 to 5 years from now, when there's a potential for presenting evidence to an administration who already may be morally persuaded, but might need a business case to convince the American public that it's still a good thing to do, so not just that it's morally correct, but it's the right financial decision to make, we'll be able to do that. And that's actually the way it worked in Canada, and the way it will work here is to simply say, if you can just divert the money, you're already spending all this money. If you divert it to allocate it to the right sources, you can spend less money and get better results. So in the Doge era, that's exactly, if we had people who might be willing to listen to us, and if we already had the data assembled, that's exactly what we would say. We would say, if you want to reduce the budget, just take the money that you're spending here, spend it here instead, and you can reduce it by 1/3 at a minimum. You might be able to reduce it by 2/3. And not only will you get good outcomes, you'll get better outcomes than spending 3 times as much as you would anyway. So I feel really good about this. I got to tell you, though, I was working with that group in NARF yesterday, and at some point we all had to as a small group, have conversations about certain aspects of how we found ourselves where we are, and then report back to the group. And at some point, like, our group did their share out, and then somebody pointed at me and said, but he thinks differently, and was talking about how some of the positive things I was saying. And I said to the group, and this is what scares me about the era we find ourselves in. If I'm the optimist in the group, we've got a problem. Other questions? Well, I think that gives you maybe 5 minutes? Oh, sorry. She's in control. That's right. I don't know. Well, thank you guys for your time. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.
Good. All right. So we got to be careful, Sean, because if we let the people go, we got to get them back in.
I should have finished.
No, it's fine. So it is, I think we might actually move onwards, and then if we end early, you can just get up and leave. Okay, so we are going to start our next session, which is a little bit about hope. And I do want to, before we start here, talk about tribal sovereignty as a superpower. And the Indigenous Guardians program at its heart, and why I think that it became so attractive for our tribal nation members as we began to learn more about it, is it really is about supporting tribal citizens, so tribal people to be on the land, to be using their ceremonies, their traditions, their values, their laws, be that indigenous law, natural law, to really heal their landscapes, right? And the idea that like the potential for creativity when you are not constrained is very powerful. And what can happen when you start to take the straitjacket off of all the rules, and when you start to lead through an indigenous lens. So the Guardians program is really great. I'm kicking myself. Jess, where's Jess? Jess, stand up, please. All right. I would like to call out and recognize Jess Phillips, Chickahominy Eastern. Sean mentioned a video that is actually a video that was conducted on Chickahominy Eastern Division lands, and it was a beautiful identification of what's possible And so I'm kicking myself that we didn't put it up, but we'll find a way to send it out with the conference materials. It's fantastic, and it really does it gives me hope. I'll just use my I statements. It gives me hope about what's possible through the connection of culture, language, the revitalization of indigenous knowledge, and remembering that knowledge, and coming back into relationship with the land. So we're going to send that video out to you. You will probably cry. But it is a really wonderful practice, and we're really excited about the Indigenous Guardians programs and thinking more about how we can start and not wait. How we can start now. And how we can build on what the tribal nations already have in place, and just grow that capacity throughout the tribe. So we're going to head into our next session, which is about hope. And before we start, we're going to hear a message from someone that Chief Ann and I and Rex actually got to meet up in June, whose name is Dr. Sylvia Earle, who in the marine conservation space, that's where I started my environmental career in ocean conservation. She is known as her deepness. So we're going to start that video, and then I'm going to ask the panel to come up here.
I'm excited to announce that Chesapeake Bay is a hope spot. This is the largest estuary on the east coast of North America and the third largest in the world. Chesapeake Bay is a unique and vital ecosystem, home to thousands of species of plants and animals. The word Chesapeake comes from the Algonquin term, I'll spell it rather than pronounce it, Chesepioc, meaning Great Shellfish Bay. This is a nod to the historic and ongoing importance to the region's indigenous tribes. The bay is not only crucial to local biodiversity, but it also holds a significant place in global ecological processes. It serves as a migratory crossroads for numerous species, including birds, marine mammals, and fish. The bay has faced environmental challenges from habitat degradation, declining water quality, and losses of oyster reefs, which once played a crucial role in water filtration and shoreline stabilization. However, large-scale restoration and protection efforts are now underway, and the Hope Spot designation is a timely and vital step in supporting these efforts. Collaboration is the key. Organizations working together, combining modern science with traditional indigenous knowledge. Congratulations to all of the individuals, the organizations, the champions for this Hope Spot, the Explorers Club, and the Paul S. Sarbanes Coastal Ecology Center for their tireless efforts in supporting this designation. Together, we are committed to safeguarding Chesapeake Bay as a global treasure for everyone.
So I would like to now ask our panelists to come up here. I will be facilitating this panel, so we're going to have chairs here for everyone. I would like to invite Dr. Stephen Tomasetti, who serves as University of Maryland's Eastern Shore and the NOAA Living Marine Resource Cooperative Science Center as an assistant professor of coastal environmental science. Welcome, Stephen. I would like to invite Dr. Kaylee Krieg, who is the State Science and Policy Fellow working with the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science to support the Science and Technical Working Group of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, and a new member of the Explorers Club. Kaylee, can you please come join us? And good night. All right, that's good. That's really good. All right, and finally, I would like to invite Chief Ann Richardson of the Rappahannock Tribe to join us. All right. So this is going to be a bit of a multimedia tour de force. But before we start, I just wanted to put all of some, these are not all, these are some of the supporting organizations who supported the nomination of the Hope Spot for the Chesapeake Bay. We're going to learn a little bit more about the Hope Spot. You're going to hear about some ways that different Indigenous nations have been coming together around other Hope Spots, and then I hope that we can create an invitation for what that can mean for tribal nations here in the Chesapeake Bay region. Some organizations who supported the Hope Spot elected not to be publicly acknowledged, so I just want to say that one of the reasons that the Chesapeake Bay was, and it was a global nomination process, was awarded the nomination was two reasons. One, because there were so many collaborating organizations that supported its designation, and two, is because it was principally had an element of respecting and honoring Indigenous knowledge as important to the Hope Spot designation. So we're going to talk about those two things, and I'm going to shift my place over here. So, all right, excellent. Okay, so it's delightful to be in conversation with you all. I have a couple of questions that have been preceded with our panelists, so they know they're coming. I wanted to talk a little bit about why a Hope Spot as a symbol of hope is so important and important to you. And I'm going to pass the mic, ask Kaylee to speak first, and introduce herself, if you could give a little introduction for yourself as well to folks.
Okay. This is on? Yeah. I'm Kaylee Krieg. I am White Earth Ojibwe, so closer. Oh, wow. Now I'm loud. So earlier when we heard the Rights of Nature talk, I was really honored that they were talking about my band in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. I joined the Chesapeake Bay Hope Spot team last year. They had already started the effort to get this designation nomination underway. So one of my very first meetings was actually with Melissa Ann and Chief Ann, and I was like, wow, this is definitely a group I'm going to keep working with. They're already engaging the Indigenous folks, so I know that we're on the right path. So you wanted me to do a little overview of Hope Spots, right?
Yeah, do a little overview of Hope Spots and also share with us what the Hope Spot means to you.
Okay. So Dr. Sylvia Earle kind of went over the Hope Spots in the video, but to give you a little background, in 2009, 10, she created Mission Blue and then began this process of designating places of special ecological significance to the ocean around the world. So they are found globally. There's 167. Yeah, we're 167. And they're found in the United States, in the global south, all over the place. So this is like a global network of hope. And it's not just, it's not regulatory, it's not legislative. It is to shine a light on places that are important. During the Chesapeake Bay application that we went through with Mission Blue, we really focused on the connection to the Bay, because as we know, all the Indigenous folks that have lived in and around the Bay and within the watershed even, and later I think there will be a picture of the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed that goes into the water. But we know that the Bay is not just about the water, it's about the people that have lived here and stewarded the land and waters for years. So, thousands of years. There are these are the four things that are really important to me when we went through what the Hope Spot was going to mean and what we were going to do. And Stephen will talk a little bit more about some of the specific projects, but the ideas that we really were focused on was this interconnectedness of the land and water and how it all affects the Bay itself. So that's why it was really important to me. And yeah, I think go to the next person.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Chief Ann, I'm going to pass the mic. Oh, Kaylee will pass the mic to you. Thank you. Thank you for dealing with our awkwardness. So during our discussion of
the Hope Spot and sort of its proclamation, you talked a little bit about the importance of the warrior cry. And I just wanted you to go into that a little bit more.
Okay, okay. So when I was first approached with this, I thought it would be awesome because as, you know, a fourth generation chief in my family, I watched my elders hope. I watched the elders in our community hope. They hoped for a better day. They hoped for the dawning of a new day in their generations, and they fought for that hope their entire lives. And they were able to see little progress, and yet they survived it anyway. You know, kind of like where we are now. You know, there could be no hope in what we see today, but we're going to survive it anyway. And so there's always hope for tomorrow. Hope for our waters, that our next 7 generations will be able to live here, fish, hunt, eat the foods, enjoy the waters, and the bounty of everything that Creator has given us. So our belief is that He created the earth. He put everything on the earth that we would need to survive and be well. And then He created us and put us in it. And so there is nothing here that we don't need, and that the earth needs us for everything that it needs. We were created to be together in a relationship of reciprocity. When I heard about the Hope Spot, all of those things just came kind of rushing back in my mind, and it was emotional for me because I have been that hopeful person my whole life too. I've carried the hope of my ancestors, right? And so I saw this as the war cry. You know, our people would do the war cry first and declare the victory before the battle was ever started. And so I saw this as a war cry, a battle cry for our lands and waters. And the ability to connect globally around the earth to the people who our Creator had set aside to steward all of these things until He returns for us. And so I got really hyped about it. I got emotional about it. It had a very deep meaning to me. And I was like, you know, because I'm like a war chief anyway, I was like, okay, I did the war cry in my office, and I said, yes, we're doing this Hope Spot. Because this is going to put the Chesapeake Bay on the global map. And it's going to bring along with it all of the tribes that have stewarded these lands for all these thousands of years, and highlight the need and the desperation for indigenous knowledge and stewardship.
Thank you. That's why I work for you, not Sean. You're a hopeful woman, and I love it. Stephen, could you give a little, so you were a co-nominator of the Hope Spot. Can you talk a little bit about, introduce yourself, but then also talk about like what hope means to you in the Chesapeake Bay? Yeah.
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. Firstly, I'm Stephen Tomasetti. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and I was one of the co-nominators of the Chesapeake Bay Hope Spot, along with the Explorers Club and a number of folks across that organization. I'd like to just add that I'm also super honored to be here, to be invited to speak here, and to chat with you all about some of my experiences in the nomination process and sort of the Hope Spot meaning and why we chose Chesapeake Bay and what we've learned along the way, even prior to the nomination. And I've forgotten the question.
What makes you hopeful?
Great, what makes me hopeful? Well, I think in order to answer that, actually, let me just start on a personal note. I'm a new dad. I have a new now 8-month-old to go along with her older sister, who is 3 years old, and I've moved around a lot in my life because I wanted to be an academic, and that means a few years here doing school, and then move somewhere else, and do a few years there doing school, and then move somewhere else, and so on. And near the tail end of my sort of journey of moving from place to place, I had my first child, and she lived in 3 different houses in her first 3 years of life. And then the second one came along, and we sort of put down roots on the eastern shore of Maryland, in the Chesapeake region. I was living in New York before that, long ago. So in doing that, and started like really setting down our roots and building a community and reflecting on my children and what it might mean to stay in one place finally and see how that place changes through time. I was, and also being a coastal ecologist and always living near the water, I was of course like drawn to the Chesapeake waters and the history here and the way that so many different community groups have depended historically on the bounty from the watershed and from the bay. And so, over the course of my education, I've been lucky to be a part of a number of different ecological restoration sort of projects because that's been my focus. But as I was approached to join the HopeSpot team for the Chesapeake Bay, it really became like way more personal, thinking about like, yeah, this is the bay that my kids might grow up on and look to as like home, and recognizing that there's been communities that have called this home for going back for thousands of years. So hope in that context for me is the idea that it can get better over time, and it can give more than what we see today, and the fact that benefits will outlast me, and then outlast my kids, and continue on from generation to generation. So that's how I would answer that one. Sure.
Thank you. So when Chief Ann and I first were starting to talk to Mission Blue and the HopeSpot team, we weren't really sure what it was. It was a little confusing. I was like, is it a law? Is it a protected area? What is it? And so at the same time, the chiefs had been talking about the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And we knew that the proposal was going to go in at the end of January. And so it just so happened that everything lined up where they made a declaration in the middle of January of this year, because that's when the nomination was due. And I said, this is a beautiful opportunity to connect with some really powerful partners. Mission Blue and Sylvia Earle. I mean, Dr. Earle is respected all over the world, and she moves mountains. As well as the Explorers Club, which is a very, eclectic and very traveled group of actual explorers. And I thought, what a great union to come together and to actually respect and honor Indigenous knowledge and identify best practices in weaving and co-producing knowledge together. What a great opportunity. So, it was such a wonderful thing. I know we shared it with our Tribal Nation members at a board meeting, and wasn't really sure what would happen, and it kind of went into the great machine of the nomination process. And then what came out that it was indeed accepted, and we got invited to actually meet with other HopeSpots. That really started, I mean, there's something catalytic. We've been talking about networks of hope. That really started the engine moving quite quickly. And two of the people that we got to meet were Margaret Smith and also Sunshine Gums, who came to speak and share all of the beautiful things that had been happening with the Shinnecock Indian Nation. So we have a little presentation. Kelsey Leonard wishes she could have been here with us, but I want to cue that up because it's pretty phenomenal. So, if it doesn't get you excited.
Kwe Winikasak. Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Dr. Kelsey Leonard. I am a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Waters, Climate and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo, a Senior Fellow Advocate for the Earth Law Center, and I am also a citizen of the Shinnecock Nation and one of the co-investigators for the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot and a part of the facilitation team in that leadership role for the governance of the Hope Spot. We're so happy to be here with you today virtually. Our apologies that some of our team was not able to be there in person, but we know that the folks who are there with you are sharing all of their hopes for these wonderful, special marine habitats that are part of our planet. So I'm honored today to share with you the story of the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot. So Shinnecock Bay, for those that are unfamiliar, is located on the south shore of Long Island. It's a place of incredible ecological richness, cultural significance for us as a Shinnecock Nation, and of course, thereby deep ancestral ties. So even more so for us as Shinnecock people, sometimes I like to say, I'm not sure which came first, Shinnecock Bay or Shinnecock Nation. Are we named for the Bay, or is the Bay named for us? I think we're inherently intertwined, and that really speaks to how these waters, the Bay, is more than just a habitat. It's kin, it's been a teacher, an ancestor, and a relative for how we understand our duties and obligations to protect Mother Earth. And so we're really fortunate to have collaborators like Dr. Ellen Pikich and Stony Brook University, staff members like Christine Santora, who are just so dedicated to this work, as well as environmental and cultural staff and tribal members from the Shinnecock Nation, like Sunshine Gums. Together, they have really been the core of movement building for this work over the past few years. So let's go back a little bit. In 2022, Mission Blue recognized Shinnecock Bay as a hope spot, joining a global network of marine areas critical to the health of our planet. This designation amplifies our effort to protect, restore, and honor the Bay for future generations. Now, notably, this also coincided with our co-nominators for our Hope Spot from the Explorers Club. And I really feel like this collaboration has allowed for us to restory, to reimagine what our narrative looks like as Indigenous peoples in collaboration with explorers and with exploration. And this idea that although we may have had traumatic experiences in the past with those who called themselves explorers, that we too have been explorers throughout our history. And we can lean into those positive moments and those positive stories, and we can also reclaim our narrative by creating new positive moments and positive stories of scientific endeavor. And that's really what our Hope Spot is all about. So to do that, we also recognized that there needed to be Indigenous leadership in the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot. It just would seem silly otherwise. So we established the Indigenous Advisory Council for the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot. Their purpose is to guide the work with integrity and to allow for us to have Indigenous counsel to really ensure that Indigenous knowledge and science is at the forefront of how we think about bay protection, habitat conservation, and the practice and methods of scientific conduction. And so we formed that council with invitations in spring of 2024, and we held our first meeting in July of 2024. The council is historic. It's the very first Indigenous Advisory Council established for any Hope Spot globally. We hope the first, but not the last, as you will have heard today from some of our sister tribes. But for us, the Council ensures that every research question, every restoration action, and every partnership reflects Indigenous values and priorities. It centers principles such as respect, reciprocity, and responsibility, principles that have sustained our people, our nation, and the Bay itself since time immemorial. So it's really critical that those are maintained. We're thrilled that this model is now inspiring our sister tribes, as mentioned earlier, such as those here in the Chesapeake Bay, to develop similar councils, perhaps to develop other governance structures, but the priority is that it's Indigenous-led and Indigenous-designed. We looked forward to being able to learn and grow together as this movement of Indigenous-led ocean protection continues to grow and expand and thrive. Now, all of this set us up to be able to have a really strong expedition. The Explorers Club has led expeditions for hundreds of years, and we're really excited that, again, in that restoring process, that process of reclaiming our narrative, we were able to be selected to host an expedition flag and to have an expedition on Shinnecock Bay over the past year. So from June 2024 to June 2025, we carried out the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot expedition. You can see Sunshine Gums and Dr. Pickett holding the Explorers Club flag here when they received it in June of 2024. And this is also some imagery from a wonderful, grounding visual note artist, Mark Compton, with our facilitation team after our first Indigenous Advisory Council meeting in July of 2024. And they set the principles of the guiding values through this visual note board of what we should work towards as a collaborative. And so from there, we really then started during the expedition. This is our Indigenous Advisory Council with some new emerging ocean technology. In this particular photo, you're seeing our USV, our uncrewed surface vehicle, that has what's called a ROXY, which is an environmental DNA sampler on it. It was the first time those two technologies had been merged together to have the most least destructive and least harmful technology to conduct this type of scientific research in our bay, where previously any type of biodiversity monitoring was largely through trawling endeavors, which can disrupt the seabed floor. So during the expedition, we conducted biodiversity monitoring, we explored restoration strategies, and we amplified the stories of resilience that flow from the bay. Our work combined state-of-the-art science, as you can see here with the USV, particularly environmental DNA, sampling the uncrewed surface vehicle, as well as rooting that in our Indigenous governance system and thinking about relational accountability. For us, it wasn't just about collecting data, it was about demonstrating how Indigenous and other scientific traditions around the world can walk together or float together in balance along the way. We hosted gatherings on the water and along the shore with our Indigenous Advisory Council, with community members, with interested allies, and we allowed for our entity, our Hope Spot, to be able to create space for intergenerational knowledge exchange. And in particular, we really emphasize collaboration with youth and early career scientists. So these are just some other photos from the expedition of different community members and staff and youth who were piloting the USV. They had to place it into the bay, and then you have to pilot it from a remote location. So a lot of technology transfer and knowledge building was happening in this space during the expedition. This is the USV out on Shinnecock Bay. Again, this is Sunshine Gums cultural ethnobotany project manager for the Shinnecock Nation at the time. The physical expedition ran in September of 2024 for about a 2-week time period. And then the remainder of the year of 2024 into 2025, we returned our flag in June of 2025 back to the Explorers Club. You can see the Explorers Club flag flying here on the USV. During that period, expeditions, you go and you do them and you collect your data, but that's not the end of the expedition. You have to analyze the data, and we really leaned into the Indigenous Advisory Council for shaping some of those conversations and the types of questions we should be asking, and more of the methodological as well as Indigenous data sovereignty components about scientific endeavors that we should be thinking about moving forward, because we do think that this expedition was a pilot. It was a way for us to test the efficacy of the technology, and thankfully it worked, and we're really excited to be able to have a permanent USV as a part of Stony Brook University to be able to conduct more of this research moving forward. So the Indigenous Advisory Council met throughout the past year. It continues to meet and is really that guiding ethical force for scientific research in the Bay. So today, the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot, it reminds us that hope is not abstract. It lives in the waters, in the marshes, in the fish and the shellfish that we hold so dear to our social and cultural well-being, and in the people who care for them. As you can see here, we're so grateful to Dr. Sylvia Earle and to Mission Blue and to our Indigenous advisors, many of whom are elders in our community, for the stewardship and the care and the knowledge they bring to this work. You can see here one of our council members, Gerard Smith, who is just a really storied knowledge keeper in our community, a fisher, a bayman, just very much connected to the Bay and to our history of interconnection and interdependence with the Bay as Shinnecock people. And all of this is also about building relationships. You know, it's about building trust, and science is really should be an endeavor that builds that hope through trust, through an ethic of love, and through joyful moments. And I think, again, coming back to this idea of exploration, it has been historically traumatic for us as Indigenous peoples, as Shinnecock people. But I think through this process and through future processes and collaborations with wonderful entities like the Explorers Club, we are being able to restory and to reclaim our narrative and to create positive, joyful moments of scientific exploration that are Indigenous-led. So as we reflect on the success of the expedition and strengthen the ongoing work of the Indigenous Advisory Council, we invite you to join us. Stand with us in recognizing the inherent rights of these waters, including Shinnecock Bay and Chesapeake Bay. Continue to advance Indigenous leadership, support it, recognize it, and hopefully together we're able to ensure that Shinnecock Bay and Chesapeake Bay remain sources of life and hope for generations to come. So, Tabutni, thank you from all of us at the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot, the Shinnecock Nation, and everyone who carries hope in their heart for these beautiful waters that call us home.
Chief Ann, we're going to talk a little bit about the proposal of the Hope Spot itself and some potential opportunities, because I think one of the things that we learned from the Shinnecock Hope Spot was the need to be deliberate, consultative, and really lean deep and develop new structures to encourage Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous relationship and Indigenous guidance of Hope Spots. Can you talk a little bit about some of the activities and the opportunities that you see in the future?
So yes, when we were at the Explorers Club, they showed a video of, was it in the 50s? They had originally come down to Gwynn's Island to explore Gwynn's Island and see what was there. And then they went back this year to the same spot and looked at what was there now and compared the two. And I thought that was really amazing. Of course, there was a lot that wasn't there now that used to be there, but we are we just transferred, thank you to the Friends of the Rappahannock, I don't know where Brent is, oh, there you are, a 72-acre oyster lease, and we just had the celebration a couple weeks ago. And, Dr. Tomasetti is working with our environmental director, Jack Ryan, wherever he is, to further that program. And our hope is to get our own oyster beds and our own operation going for the tribe, so that Rappahannock oysters, when I go back to Jackson Hole, I won't have to go out there and see the Rappahannock oyster sign on the restaurants out there. I can see them in my own community. And once again, our people will be able to oyster and at the same time clean the water of our Rappahannock River as well as the bay. And so those are the hopes that I have, that our people will be able to return to those indigenous activities that not only kept us healthy, but kept our earth healthy, our waters healthy, and everybody else that is with us healthy for future generations.
And I'm going to go to Stephen since he's holding the mic. Can you talk a little bit more about the proposal and potential activities moving forward?
Sure, yes. So really, to talk about the Chesapeake Bay Hope Spot, I actually have to go back in time to the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot. I was not involved in the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot designation. However, I did my PhD at Stony Brook and was involved in what used to be called the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program, which preceded the Hope Spot designation. And I'll just say as an aside, when I first arrived there and I was interviewing for the PhD position that I ended up taking there, they had taken me out to this beautiful marine station on Shinnecock Bay, and just across the waterway you could see the tribal lands of the Shinnecock Nation. And I had asked who would be my future advisor at the time, how do you collaborate with the Shinnecock Nation, in your work here? And he said, we haven't really done that yet, but we're open to it. But since after that time, much later in time, Ellen Pickett, who they talked about in the video, really spearheaded efforts to create this partnership with the Shinnecock Nation. And you can see how their involvement totally enhanced, at that point, what was already the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot through these really interesting research objectives, low or no impact sampling, through this partner restoration and doing, it wasn't in the video, but doing kelp restoration, doing all these other things, and even through sort of cultural education type programs where, for instance, together the Shinnecock Nation created a Machoon, a dugout canoe. It's dug out with fire, and then it was put on display to celebrate the Hope Spot, and placed in a museum where people could come and learn about Shinnecock Bay and the Shinnecock Nation. But anyway, all that to say, I started there, and I was involved in the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program. And Shinnecock Bay is a very small, it's only 9,000 acres of water, so it's relatively small. Just to put it in perspective, you could fit 1,200 Shinnecock Bays into one Chesapeake Bay. And Shinnecock Bay is also about 5 feet deep for most of the bay. Chesapeake Bay average depth is about 20 feet, so that really means there's more like 5,000 Shinnecock Bays in one Chesapeake Bay. So, it's small and it's shallow, and because of that, human pressures, human impacts can really have a large influence on the bay's ecology and the bay's functioning. And what was seen over time in the Shinnecock Bay is as human settlement increased and the flux of nitrogen to the waters increased, fishing on the bay increased, and a lot of the native clams were overfished, and native oyster reefs were degraded through time. And then they started getting these harmful algal blooms in the 80s that really wiped out whatever was left of the shellfish populations and of the habitat in the area, seagrass habitat, for instance, which easily gets shaded out when you have all of these, this algae in the water blocking the sun. So as a response to that, they started the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program, which I was very fortunate to be a part of. And the goal here was to reverse course. But the question was, how do we make it happen? And our focus was really on shellfish, harnessing the power of shellfish. And that's a common theme that we'll see again, and that Chief Ann started talking about in the waters of the Rappahannock. We were thinking, okay, there used to be a lot of clams here. There aren't really hard clams anymore. Clams are these animals that dig into the sediment, and they stick their little siphons up into the water column from the sediment, and they filter down the water, and they remove algal particles and other particles, and they take a lot of the nitrogen that's trapped in that algae, and they either incorporate it into their body tissues, or they get it into the sediment and out of the water. But in order to restore the hard clam population to its former abundance, we would have needed essentially hundreds of millions of dollars to get enough clams in the bay that it was at the level that it was historically. And obviously that's not feasible. So the idea was to create these large hard clam, what we called spawner sanctuaries, which were basically areas that were closed to fishing, where we stocked hard clams in large numbers, and expected that they would spawn. So they spawn their sperm and their eggs into the water column. They find each other, turn to larvae, then the larvae drift through the bay for a couple weeks before they settle. And the idea was if we stocked them large enough, if we stocked them dense enough in these areas, and we continued to do it year after year, we could start to build back the population. Well, we did it for about 10 years, and we started in 2012, and by 2019, we had seen population in the rest of the bay outside of the spawner sanctuaries really increase to, I have the exact numbers here. It's over 20-time increase since the start of the program in the number of hard clams we were counting across the bay. And we were seeing fishing increase too, and we were seeing the highest hard clam landings that we'd seen in almost 50 years. And so it was really fascinating to be a student and seeing these changes. But what was really, really interesting was the elimination of harmful algal blooms that used to be there year after year in the summer. Since 2020, we haven't seen a harmful brown tide bloom in those waters. And we also see gains in seagrass habitat. And so we'd seen all these really neat changes, and we'd also onboarded the Shinnecock Nation and really started working more collaboratively with the Shinnecock Nation. So, it was hard to leave Stony Brook and move on to the next place, but down the road, Ellen called me and said, hey, we're thinking about stepping up and trying to do Chesapeake Bay as the next hope spot, and I hear that you're living there and working there now. Would you be interested? And so, of course, I was super excited, and I jumped at the opportunity. And we get to use Shinnecock Bay as the blueprint for how we could do this and the inspiration. And so she spent a lot of time talking to me about the ways that she had made these partnerships with the Shinnecock Nation and how that's really influenced the scale of what they've been able to do in Shinnecock Bay. And so, for me, the story of Shinnecock Bay and Chesapeake Bay and the U.S. East Coast really is a shellfish-based story. I mean, I'm biased because I'm an ecologist who studies shellfish, so I like to put shellfish at the center of everything. But what we see often and across the U.S. East Coast is that our waters go as the shellfish go. If the shellfish beds are depleted and empty, then oftentimes the water quality is degraded and challenging. And when we have thriving shellfish populations, that tends to coincide with highly functioning ecosystems. So Ellen asked me in particular, she said, I'd really like you to, we've been meeting with the ICC and the Rappahannock tribe, and I'd really like you to get to know them and to consider doing something with oyster restoration, because they've just acquired this 72-acre oyster lease, and they're going to do oyster restoration and oyster aquaculture, and this is stuff that this is the kind of stuff that I'm doing regularly in my job. So I was super excited to get involved, and now I just feel very honored that they've this is work they've already been doing, that they've been working on independently for some time, but have now invited us to join them. And so what I think the HopeSpot team offers to and the HopeSpot team and the HopeSpot designation provides the community is this network of collaborators with different strengths and different expertise that can work together to try and enrich projects and build out their scale of them, and a platform, a global platform that elevates stories, that elevates voices, diverse voices, accomplishments, 30 institutional partners, some that have deep pockets, some that don't, and really just a lot of more access to opportunities, like financial opportunities to fund. So the HopeSpot has a grant program that we're applying to, that Jack Ryan and I are applying to get more funds to enrich the restoration. And so from my perspective, getting involved in this designation, it was really about an inclusive restoration, bridging science with traditional knowledge, and working together with, in my eyes, the original stewards of the Chesapeake Bay oyster reefs. We know that oysters have been around for at least 3,000 years, 3,500 years, and were managed over that period by indigenous tribes. And those are the types of timescales that we really don't think about as ecologists too often. We don't really tend to think more than like 50-year increments, but that's true sustainability, right? When you can manage an oyster reef system for thousands of years, as opposed to, the hundreds of years that we've seen it take to degrade the once abundance reefs that we have. So it's a coalition effort, and it's really been a great opportunity for me to be involved, and I'm really excited about the direction we're going.
Thank you. So this one is a little combination question for Kaylee and Chief Ann. I wanted to talk a little bit about the opportunities for co-production of knowledge moving forward, and what you think it could be a possibility, and to issue sort of an invitation for many to join us in this HopeSpot across tribal nations. So just curious. Thank you.
I mean, I could just go first because you speak very eloquently, and I don't want to go right after. So I think that there's so much possibility, right? We have started the conversations already, and I have a feeling that we're going to have conversations that we don't even foresee, in the coming years. In the proposal process, we laid out a 3-year plan, and we kind of looked year by year what we wanted to do. And in that first year is really establishing the formal relationship with the Rappahannock tribe, and solidifying what we can do with the ICC, and reaching out to the other tribal nations in the Chesapeake region. So that is, I think that we don't even know where this could go, but I think it can go so far. And we're talking about knowledge holders being able to inform some of the restoration science that's going on, not just merging them, but really having a two-way knowledge exchange. And yeah, I'm excited. It's hopeful.
Yeah, that's what I was excited about because, you know, these guys are like walking brains when it comes to ecology. And to be able to join them with indigenous knowledge of the tribes here on their traditions and practices in stewarding the lands and the waters. You know, I read the books, Braiding Sweetgrass, and I loved it. But this is like boots on the ground, braiding it together and using it as a model for other tribes and other organizations. So I think it's going to be very beneficial for all of us in the future. So I thank you guys for being our sponsors and being there to work with us. I really am excited about it.
All right, I still have my mic. So I just want to talk a little bit about the future, and I might bring it back to the Chesapeake Bay as a watershed. So what's interesting about this Hope Spot is it is watershed wide, which means as a drop of rain falls on the land in the Chesapeake and finds its way from the land into the bay, that is sort of the extent of this Hope Spot. But I really wanted to understand what kinds of calls of action do you have for folks in the room to support and contribute to the Hope Spot? And I'm going to start with Stephen.
Well, I mean, there's been talk today about engagement and boots on the ground. Those terms I've heard a few times. I think to answer that question, I mean, I think that's it in my mind. It's getting your boots on the ground and joining us, and you know, using your networks and your influence to become involved in whatever capacity you feel is appropriate based on your needs and your strengths, and recognizing that you basically have an instant community of collaborators who are ready to harness whatever strengths you have and build on it for for the good of our indigenous communities in the region and for the good of everyone who accesses the Chesapeake Bay and who lives in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So I think we're all eager collaborators, and that was the biggest draw for me to this whole project, was the ability to work with diverse communities, diverse stakeholders, and knowing that people have different needs and that science is one tool that we can use to help support decisions, but not the only one. And so, as has been mentioned, the reciprocal knowledge exchange, the things that we can learn from you and that we can help you learn, are all of the, in my mind, benefits to your involvement. So, I'll give out my email, or the ICC can share that with everybody. But feel free to to reach out, and I'm happy to take it from there.
Okay, I guess I'm just going to really echo that, and to quote Kimmerer, Dr. Kimmerer, one of my very favorite people, all flourishing is mutual. So as you hear what the Chesapeake Bay Hope Spot does now, intends to do, or in the future, something comes to mind that sparks something that could be beneficial for everyone Chesapeake Bay wide, come to us through any of us, I think, to discuss those ideas and come up with a plan to move ideas forward. And I think that we can come up with some really innovative ideas that could get some attention too at some higher levels of legislation. Like, we're not legislative or regulatory bodies, but we want voices to be heard, and I think that collectively we can help that.
I agree, and I was excited about the fact that our young people will be able to learn from these amazing scientists and be able to put into practice the traditional knowledge, but understanding the science behind it as they go forth and relearn these traditional practices that we have not been able to do for, however many years our people were not on the water and could not practice these things. And so being able to return those practices back to the next generation so that it can be carried forward is really exciting to me. And I talk about restoration all the time because people ask me what I want, and I want restoration. And they say, what does restoration look like? And I thought, I don't know, because I don't know what I've lost. I mean, think about that. In this generation, we didn't know what we lost. We'd lost so much that we did not even know that we had lost. And so restoration to me is training our young people in our ways to be able to expand their knowledge base in science, in law, in all of the areas that are needed to manage and to lead our people into the future. So that's what is exciting for me.
Thank you. Well, I am hopeful that the Indigenous Conservation Council, I want to give a shout out to my two colleagues that I meant to actually introduce earlier and have them stand. The first is Desiree Shalley, who is our Indigenous Knowledge and GIS Specialist. Desiree. She is an enrolled citizen of the Monacan Indian Nation. And our second colleague who is here with us today is brand new this week. Her name is Hannah Goins. She is an enrolled citizen of the Lumbee Nation, and she is our sovereignty specialist who's just starting with us. So we are doing some work. We're co-developing some homelands mapping with our tribal nation members and hope to be expanding that over the course of this process. But part of that mapping exercise is to really identify priorities such as shellfish, priorities such as other conservation projects that are important to tribal nations, and to build the capacity of tribal nations to engage their youth. And so I'm really excited. So watch this space, because I feel like the Sovereignty Conference is a place to say, coming up next. Yeah. Well, we're so grateful for all of you to be with us today. We're going to say thank you very much. Chief Ann, do you have any final words to say to people?
I do. I would like to thank the Rappahannock staff for the incredible job that they do every year. And I would like to thank the tribal leadership of the Rappahannock tribe for allowing me to do all these crazy things that I do. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. God bless you. See you next year.